That's really what applied.
Early morning on the second day, Curtis led a counter-attack on a Chinese machine gun post, pouring down fire on his men. On his first attempt to knock it out, Curtis was badly wounded.
They sought cover on the folds of the hill and so on. One of his corporals said to him, "Sir, very soon one of the medics will be here to give you to see to your wound." But Philip Curtis said no, he would go on.
He then decided he was going to attack it by himself. Attempts were made to dissuade him, but he said he was going, and then an extraordinary thing happened. He ran out from the wire, threw a grenade. The grenade was in the air. Before it hit the ground, he was riddled with bullets and killed. The grenade then fell on the men in the machine gun position and knocked it out.
For this extraordinary act of bravery, Philip Curtis was awarded the Victoria Cross. He was just 24 years old.
I mean, it requires uncommon gallantry to do that. People receive decorations for acting beyond the line of duty, to doing things that you could hardly ask them to do because it would be beyond whatever duty they owed. That was beyond the line of duty.
Also decorated was Jeff Costello, whose gallantry won him the Military Cross.
They tried to come up my hill several times. I had a grenade thrown at one stage which landed just close to me. It was only one of those things that make your face black. They're like a blast more than any shrapnel or anything like that.
To blunt the Chinese attacks, Jeff Costello's platoon deployed all their formidable firepower.
Several of their assaults just broke up because you can imagine the force of five Bren guns with one loose on the side. That's 30 rounds, that's 150 rounds all in one spurt in the space of seconds. I saw an awful lot of dead Chinese.
Whilst the Gloucesters defended the left flank of the battlefield, the Royal Northumberland Fusiliers on the right were also bearing the brunt of the Chinese offensive.
There was a company called Z Company, and there was fighting all night on this mountain, and it was slaughter, and we had to go and get them off this. They were surrounded by Chinese. We had to go, our company, Y Company, had to go and rescue them more or less. But we had to leave all the dead behind, but we got all the wounded out and the other men. And there was one chap called Major Wynne, and he was covered in blood. He'd been wounded 3 times, and his uniform was stiff and caked with blood. And as he fell off the hill, one of our chaps said to him, "Be careful, sir, there's some snipers on the way down." And he said, "What does one more matter?" He got the DSO for that.
On this second day, the men of the Royal Ulster Rifles were called up to hold the line on the right flank. Marching into combat for the first time was a national serviceman, 20-year-old John Dyer.
I'd never seen so many troops in all my life. The hillside was literally covered in them. If you can imagine, if you've ever seen on a film, when the lemmings go over a cliff, it was just like that. Then we realised that we were into trouble. I mean, we wouldn't be human if we hadn't got scared. I mean, a mass of people rushing at you, bayonets fixed, grenades being thrown, shouting, screaming, because they used it as a fear tactic, you see.
Day 3 of the battle saw savage fighting continue all along the UN front line. Peng's hope of a swift breakthrough was now fading. The commander of the 29th Brigade, Brigadier Brodie, contacted his American superior in the UN to ask how he might further deploy his men. Brodie could report that heavy casualties were being inflicted, but the brigade was now outnumbered 8-1. They were stranded with Chinese in, around and behind them. Yet any hopes of relief were then dashed by an American misunderstanding of British understatement.
British brigadier reports his position. The American commander responds. The British, being asked, "How are things with you, brigadier?" said, "Well, they're a bit sticky here, sir," expecting the divisional commander to realise that if he said that, it was pretty difficult for him. But the American divisional commander thought that meant we're having rough and tumble here, but we're holding. If it had been an American there, he'd have said, "Sir, there is all hell breaking loose here." The two nations spoke militarily in a slightly different way.
Without the promise of further support, Colonel Khan of the Gloucesters decided to fall back to a peak known in Korean as Solma Ri, later known as Gloucester Hill. Here the Gloucesters would make their last stand.
I remember our battalion doctor said to me, "Padre, can you carry as many bandages and medical equipment as you can?" Which I gladly did, of course. And in the moonlight, it's a picture of scrambling, panting men going up this very steep hill. Everyone knew that the Chinese would probably start a night attack, and that we'd be very lucky to survive that.
We then heard this eerie sound of the Chinese bugles, which are not strident, if you like European bugles are. I wouldn't say they're melodious either. They're haunting, sad. Colonel Khan, I think, sort of heard this for about 5 or 10 minutes, and he said, "Right, we must clearly do better than that."
The colonel and I were talking about these bugles. He said, "It's a long time before I'll want to hear a cavalry trumpet," which is what it sounded like, again. I said to him, "Well, should we not perhaps send some bugle calls back?" He said, "Good idea, let's do that." I called down the side of the hill, "Drum Major, have you got your bugle?" "Sir." He, of course, silly question, he always had his bugle with him. I said, "Well, play some tunes to discountenance the Chinese." "What shall I play?" I said, "Play everything." So Butts, who was a great big tall man, fine man, stood up in the darkness on the side of the hill and played everything from Reveille to Lights Out. It did stop the Chinese playing the bugles for about an hour.
The Chinese made 7 furious attempts to wipe out the few hundred remaining Gloucesters, now isolated and encircled on the upper slopes.
Bear in mind that I was commanding the remnants of a company holding that position. They were around 400 or 500. We were down to about 40 by that stage. And the last fire I called for was the napalm. And that actually knocked out the remainder of the people anyway for the time being.
By dawn on the 4th day of the battle, the brigade's ammunition and medical supplies were dangerously low. There was little food and water. Soldiers had barely slept for 72 hours. Casualties were mounting. Orders were finally given to break out.
When, on the morning of the 25th,